Ladies and gentlemen, movie lovers and cinephiles around the world, welcome to Andy Takes On. My name is Andrew Manyika, and this is episode 1, season 1. That implies that there's going to be more seasons. Keep watching, subscribe, like, share, do the things, right? But yes, season 1, episode 1 of a movie review show where I'm going to be looking at movies past and present just to see if they're worth it for you to revisit them or to go to the cinema in the first place and check them out. Obviously, around the world at the time of filming, many people are in lockdown, and so this makes sense because it maybe gives you a few more options in terms of what to watch when we're looking for something fun to look at. So yeah, Andrew Manyika, stand-up comedian, NAMA nominated, if I say so myself. NAMA nominated stand-up comedian and performance poet and MC. It's a short list, but I do it well. And here we are focusing on one of my other loves, which is the movies. So for episode 1, we're going to be looking at Spider-Man Far From Home. Spoiler alert, I happen to call it Aunt May's Makeover, or the one where Nick Fury hijacks a high school field trip. Now, Spider-Man Far From Home, as the name suggests, is a movie that takes place on location. Now, whilst the movie set moves from Venice to Prague to London, the movie's most important location might be Tony Stark's shadow, because that's where most of the movie happens. Now, when you consider that Avengers Endgame featured the death of Iron Man and Far From Home draws a curtain on Marvel's Phase 3, you can forgive the filmmakers for making the specter of Iron Man everything short of being the leading man. So here's the lowdown, here's the story. Just for the record, and by the way, this movie is impossible to review without spoiling itself or Avengers Endgame. So if you're feeling squeamish about knowing how the story goes, now is your chance to back out. Like, not now, but right now. Like, this moment. Like, bookmark? All right. I take it everybody that is still watching is interested to know how this movie goes. So it's been 8 months since the snap. Not the Thanos snap, the Iron Man snap. And with everybody having been revived and resuscitated, Peter Parker is looking forward to an international summer field trip with his classmates. Just by the way, where did he go to school? I mean, international field trips? I was lucky to get out of class for an hour. Anyway, the only problem is that everywhere that they go, giant monsters called elementals keep literally coming up out of the ground. So as much as Peter hoped to be able to leave his alter ego in New York, with great power comes a really disturbed summer field trip. You know the drill. And now add to all this the appearance of a mystery man who is helping to fight off the monsters, and a convoluted attempt to win over the affections of MJ, because that makes sense. It's not Mary Jane, MJ, that makes so much of the sense. And the self-imposed pressure to fill Iron Man's shoes, and you have yourself the makings of a teen movie with a superhero twist. So the tone, both from a story perspective and visually, if you remember, Endgame was an emotional roller coaster. It ended on a heavy note, so it's no surprise that Far From Home seems to be determined to add a bit of levity to the MCU, because as we know, the DCEU has dibs on all the doom and the gloom. Now, this explains the addition of characters like J.B. Smoove as one of Peter's teachers.
Oh no, they joined forces like the Power Rangers.
He's purely there for comic relief, but in a movie where the tone is largely lighthearted, it starts to feel a bit camp after a while. Probably nothing highlights this more than the scene where the criminal mastermind, yes, we're doing that this time. The criminal mastermind gives us his diabolical scheme by literally shouting it at his audience and us, right? It felt like being bludgeoned by a blunt object. On the flip side, though, there are moments of hilarity when Peter tries to join a battle by saying,
"Excuse me, sir! I can help! Let me help! I'm really strong and I'm sticky!"
Which is what everybody wants to hear from a teenage boy. Now, my main issue with this film is that our hero's motivations seem to be a bit forced, right? Peter's affection for MJ came out of the blue, or rather out of the dust, because, you know, he snapped. Ah, snap. Anyway, just like the role of him as the inheritor of Iron Man's mantle, for one, it requires you to ignore the slew, the host, the whole pantheon of other heroes that are offered by this cinematic universe. Also, Tony never officially introduced Spider-Man as an Avenger. And aside from the Battle of Civil War, his biggest fights were off-world, so literally no one who is not part of his friendly neighborhood knows him. Okay, no one knows who he is. He really is just a friendly neighborhood superhero, and this film fails to make clear who exactly is clamoring for Spider-Man to become the next Iron Man? Except the producers who, after Tony's death, are definitely in need of a flagship character. But I'll share more of that in my post-review review. So in terms of character development, the film is marred by a marked lack of character growth. Peter, the Spider-Man of the comics, moves with a speed matched only by his wits in battle. The Peter Parker of this movie is much less self-assured. He's racked by guilt and self-doubt, and he's always going to be awkward because that's who Spider-Man is, but he tends to come off more as bungling and whiny, if I'm being honest. I'm rooting for him, but it's not easy. Now, MJ, we're doing that, is a one-note character, and that's the writer's fault. The brief seemed to be make her snarky and vulnerable. All of the more reason why Peter's attraction to her is all but entirely inexplicable. Well, with Mysterio, I don't want to give too much away, but let me just say that Gyllenhaal does a good job. Also, on a side note, Mysterio is one of the backdoors through which Iron Man's influence of Tony Stark is stamped into this movie. With Nick Fury, we have Samuel L. Jackson, and his whole performance this time around, I'm sorry to say, feels a bit phoned in. I suppose, he is 9 movies in, and it is a long way to go. Which is a bit ironic, actually, since a significant part of the movie, he actually has him being on his phone or with a Bluetooth headset in his ear. He's sort of like an American Suleiman Chimbetu. My Zimbos will get that. Now, fun fact about this movie is that in the series Boondocks, Samuel L. Jackson played Jin Rami, who bemoaned the use of hands-free devices, saying, "No technology is worth my dignity."
Don't ever call this number again.
Moving on to the character of Aunt May, I have to say that casting Marisa Tomei as Aunt May really allowed the character to be portrayed with a bit more depth than the usual traditional role of the doting aunt. Now, giving her a possible boyfriend, oddly, actually gives her one of the more interesting character arcs of the whole cast. So here's my take. I grew up on a show called Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. This movie feels more like Spider-Man and His Hard-to-Ditch Classmates, the sequel. Far From Home is a low-stakes romp through the world of a teenage superhero where the villains are foils for the heroes and the laughs come easy, but unfortunately so do the cringies. Now, the action sequences nearly make up for the pothole, and the MCU is reshaping after it was shaken to its iron core, although it does try to engage themes of hero worship and how reality is framed by perception in our age of social media. It does unfortunately feel like nothing more than a pit stop on the way to Phase 4. So maybe the character whose arc most reflects the franchise's Aunt May, who, like this movie, got made over to be more relevant in the digital age. My rating, a 2 out of a possible 4. And that is Spider-Man Far From Home. So here's the post-credits scene, guys, because we're doing that because it's a Marvel movie.
A few moments later.
And so here we are with a brief history of Spider-Man in the Marvel Universe. Well, in Marvel in general. So just so you know, Spider-Man was actually Marvel's flagship character, and this was decades long, right? He held down the fort so well, both in TV and in comics, that he was the go-to character whenever Marvel needed to introduce a new hero or villain or whatever the case was. And now this was a role which was later mirrored in Lou Ferrigno's Hulk series, which you guys will recall, where he was David Bruce Banner instead of Robert Bruce Banner. And all of this lasted until about 2008 when Robert Downey Jr., or RDJ as we call him in the biz, when RDJ portrayed Tony Stark so well that he became the heart of Marvel. Now, with him now dead, there is a lot of pressure on Spider-Man to reprise that behind-the-scenes role. And within that universe, people have barely heard of Spider-Man, and this is the problem. You see, after the Tobey Maguire and the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man franchises ended, I jokingly remarked that Sony needed to hand Spider-Man back to Marvel so that they could get us the hero we deserved. They did that, but the standalone Spider-Man movies show that Marvel is really yet to do justice to the webbed one, because his whole thing hasn't been that he's the Tony Stark protege. He's a hero in and of himself. So here's fingers crossed and web shooters pointed that we're going to get a good Spider movie. But I want to thank you for joining us on episode 1 of Andy Takes On. This was Andy Takes On Spider-Man Far From Home, and I hope to see you in the comments, having liked and subscribed to the page and having shared it with your friends. But until then,